Hey YouTube! So here's my video and my version on how to make a perfect steak. I know there's a bees out there, but I got a couple of tricks not everybody does. Also, this is just fun to watch. So go ahead and get a steak, let it come up to room temperature. This probably sat out for 4 hours. You really can't hurt it. Make sure it's room temperature. It'll cook much better. And I think the steak is about the sides. It's not just about the steak itself. It's about what you serve it with. So one of them that we're going to serve it with is mushrooms. And my stepfather taught me this great trick for mushrooms. He's English, and I guess this is something they do in England. So go ahead and get these mushrooms, whole mushrooms, rinse them off. You know, I kind of scrub each one, and then put them back in their little container ready to cook. All right, did you hear that? That's how hot you want the pan. Little olive oil, some canola oil. Go ahead and toss your mushrooms in there whole. Basically what we're going to do now is really salt these. We want to salt these pretty heavily because we want to bring all the moisture out and let them condense down. They're going to shrink down and turn into perfect caramelized, meaty, bite-sized pieces of mushroom, which is perfect with the steak in my opinion. So you can see me salting, and if you look, you can see I'm putting a pretty good amount of salt on these. Alright, so after they cook down for a while, they're going to look like this. This looks pretty good, right? They're not done. Keep cooking them. If you need a little more oil, if you know, some fluid is going to come out, the fluid will cook off, it'll start to look like this. If you need to add a little more oil, go ahead and do it. What you really want is to keep cooking them until they look like this. You can see they've about halved in size, they're completely caramelized. Look pretty delicious. Go ahead and set these aside. We're going to do more with them later, so just go ahead and set them aside for now. Cover them if you like, and just forget about them while we prep everything else. So along with our steak, we're going to cook some tomato slices. The tomato slices aren't anything particularly fancy, but I like having these because it helps neutralize the amount of heat in the pan. I'm only cooking one steak, and so that means I've got a large pan with one steak in it, which leaves half the pan exposed, which can create smoking, burning, all kinds of stuff we don't want. So I'm going to cut some thick tomato slices to go with this. Also, you know, it looks good on a plate, and there's nothing wrong with a fried tomato, right? So I'm just salting, peppering, and oiling these. Nothing complicated. Just, you know, season to taste. Make sure you got a good bit of oil on them because we are going to fry these. Go ahead and season this up pretty generously, salt, pepper. Now I'm going to do something you don't see a lot, and it's not something you would ever see in a restaurant, but one of the great things about cooking at home is it doesn't always matter how perfect and beautiful it looks. It's really about the final product and how good it tastes. One of the things that happens when you cook a steak like this is there's a ligament that runs underneath that fat cap that you can see closest to the screen here. And when the steak cooks, it wants to kind of like cave in, become concave, and shrink up. So what we're actually going to do is just cut that ligament. You can use a really sharp knife, but I always seem to overshoot because by the time I've cut through the ligament, I actually end up cutting into the meat. So I've just found that a clean pair of scissors actually works best. So I'm just going to push the scissors through the meat as simply as I can, gently as I can, avoiding cutting the meat, and then I'm just going to go ahead and snip that ligament. I'm going to go ahead and do that on a couple spots down throughout the steak, and this really helps with the cooking. You'll find that your steak doesn't move at all. It will sit completely flat in the pan without turning up at all, and by the time the steak is cooked and caramelized and shrunken up, you probably won't even notice that these cuts were there in the first place. Alright, get a heavy bottom pan hot. Hot enough that water evaporates immediately upon being flicked into it. Somewhere between medium and medium-high, depending upon your stove, most likely. And then go ahead and add your steak. It should sizzle pretty good when you put it in the pan. Now, what we're going to do here is time our steak. So a steak like this is this thick. I'm going to time for about 4 minutes for each side. At least the first side. I'm going to leave it for 4 minutes because I know that'll develop a nice brown crust. If you have a thinner steak, you know, a pan steak as opposed to like a thick, over an inch thick steak like this, I'd probably go with 3 minutes before I flip it or check it. Go ahead and put your tomatoes in the pan. They're going to help with this, keep down the smoking and absorb some of the heat so you don't end up with a bunch of burning. So as you can see, I'm seasoning the other face of this steak. I season pretty liberally with a steak like this. It takes a lot of salt and pepper to really bring out the flavor of a thick steak like this because there's no seasoning on the inside of it. Also, this is kind of a gluttonous meal. I'm not really worried about eating particularly healthy on this one, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure it tastes really good. Now, I haven't touched it for 4 minutes. You don't need to fuss with this thing too much. Don't move it around. Don't mess with it. And a brown crust should develop. You can see me check it, and there is a brown crust. So what I'm actually going to do is flip these tomatoes over before I move on to my next phase, just to make sure that they're cooking, because I'm going to remove the tomatoes before the end of the cooking process, because they're actually going to be done sooner. And also I'm going to need a little more room as we go into one of the other tricks I'm going to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and flip those tomatoes. And then what I'm going to do is take some time and brown every single side of this steak. I want to make sure that they're caramelized. There's nothing raw on it. Also, it looks really nice, and it tastes really good to have some sort of crunchy, roasted, caramelized meat on the different sides of the steak. I'm not going to show all of it because it takes a while to do this. It's pretty, I don't want to say it's labor intensive, but be prepared to spend a couple of minutes standing here doing this. I actually set my timer for 30 seconds and then just cook each one of these sides for 30 seconds, just holding it there as I do so. Or sometimes, if I'm lucky, it'll actually just sit there and just kind of wait while I do everything else. So I'm going to continue to get all of those good and caramelized. And, while I do that, I'll go ahead and take the tomatoes out of the pan to prepare for the next stage of this process. Okay, so we're going to remove these tomatoes from the pan, because what we're going to do next is something that you would see in a restaurant, or really what I should say, something that would happen in a restaurant, but you wouldn't actually see. I learned this trick watching some cooking shows, and it's really an amazing trick, and I think it's sort of like a little secret of steakhouses, that they go ahead and add a bunch of butter to the pan to help finish this steak in butter. So we're going to add this butter, and I'm going to let it cook until it just starts to brown. You can see it in there. It pretty much immediately starts to sizzle and melt, and the edges are going to start to brown. We don't want this to brown to the point of burning, so I'm going to go ahead and add some canola oil to it when it starts to get browned. But before I do that, as you can see, I'm going to toss some thyme in there. Thyme and steak go together really well. I mean, what doesn't thyme go with in general? It's sort of the seasonal of the spice world. Here you can see me adding that canola oil, and you can see right around the edges the butter's already starting to brown. So we're going to go ahead and just let this steak finish on that second side in this sort of butter mixture. But we're going to do a little more than that. We're actually going to spoon this butter mixture all over the steak. We're going to season it with this butter and thyme mixture. So you can see me here. I'm going to go ahead and just start splashing and covering this steak with butter. All right, I want to share with you the best trick I've ever learned for cooking steak. You see me prodding the steak right now because I'm looking for doneness. So the trick is, if you hold your thumb and forefinger together, that muscle tightens up. So if it's completely loose like that, it's going to be just above rare or rare, but if you tighten it up, press that thumb and forefinger together, it's going to make a little mound, and that is well done. So you can kind of use this as a gauge to figure out where your steak is, because one of the problems with home-cooked steaks is they're almost always overcooked because people are scared of undercooking it. The only thing worse than serving someone a well-done steak is serving them a raw steak in the middle. But this trick it works every time, and because I like my steak just a little bit over rare, like I don't want any raw in the middle, I just want it just over that, I basically look for any tightening of the steak. So when the steak itself starts to tighten up a little bit, I know that I'm there. So now we've got the steak off the heat. We're just going to let it rest. We're going to let it sit for 5-10 minutes. Really important, do this. And now what we're going to do is get the mushrooms ready. So we're going to put the mushrooms right back on that hot burner. Add a little oil if you need it. And then we're just going to deglaze the pan when that starts to sizzle, when that heat starts to come back up. I'm going to put a little bourbon in there, which you can see. You can use whatever you like. White wine works great. Stocks work great. Chicken or beef stock work excellent. And so once that's done, kind of stir it up, make that into a sauce, and then go ahead and plate everything. I added a little greens here. I just took some spring greens and mixed them with oil and vinegar, tossed a little dried cranberries and raisins in it. Because if I'm, going to eat this steak, I don't want something heavy like a potato with it. I want something that's going to kind of balance it out. So you can see here, it's just above rare, just the way I like it, perfectly cooked. The thumb and forefinger trick is a great technique. So I hope that something in this video has been useful or new to you. If not, I hope you just enjoyed watching it. Enjoy.